History of Company B, 307th Infantry, compiled by Julius KLAUSNER, Jr. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Section 1. Company B, 307th Infantry, its history, honor roll, company roster. September 1917 to May 1919. Compiled by Julius KLAUSNER, Jr., 1920. We who live remember. In remembering, we shall always seek to justify the self-sacrifice made by those companions who trained with us and fought with us, but whom, by virtue of their supreme service, we return without. They died, but being dead live on, and their spirits beckon us to strive toward that for which they died. The flag was their shrine, the fields of France their tomb, and they shall ever be wreathed with God's great glory. Major General Robert Alexander, to Company B. Greetings. I am very glad that Company B, 307th Infantry, is putting into this form the many memories of the Great War which remain with those of us who participated therein as bright spots in our path through life. The work done by the 77th Division was most notable, and in that work Company B, 307th Infantry took full part and contributed its full share. The record of the company is one of which any organization might well be extremely proud. It took part in the operations in the Vosges on the line of the Bastille and in the advance from Bastille to Antz, the 77th Division being the only American division to reach the latter river. In the Argonne Meuse offensive which brought the war to a successful conclusion, the company, with its regiment, brigade, and division, played a noteworthy part. The battle losses incurred by Company B and the battle honors conferred upon members thereof speak for themselves. Not the least of the company's exploits was that which, culminating on the evening of October 7, 1918, brought relief to the long beleaguered battalion under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Charles W. Whittlesey, the so-called Lost Battalion. The officer to whom was granted the supreme honor of sharing with you as your divisional commander the toils, the dangers, and the honors of that supreme campaign salutes you. No commander could ask more loyal support from his comrades of all ranks than was freely given me. For your future careers in civil life, or wherever fortune may lay in your paths, you will carry with you my sincere best wishes and my affectionate regard. The qualities of courage, fidelity, and loyalty displayed by you during your service as soldiers will be, I am sure, at the disposal of your country as well in peace as they were in war. Major General Robert Alexander, formerly Major General in command of the 77th Division, November 19, 1919. The History of Company B, 307th Infantry, Section 1. Camp Upton, September 10 to April 5th. Invited, all of us, and we trooped down Yaphank Way out on Long Island as though bound for a picnic, which for a week it was. Then we were brought up short. On September 17, 1917, the 77th Division came to life. One of the first units to be organized within the division was Company B, 307th Infantry, formed also on September 17th. Immediately we were on paper as a regular unit. We quickly took semblance of a military organization. Under the leadership of Captain Blanton Barrett, First Lieutenant Alexander D.B. Pratt, and Second Lieutenants Philip Cheney and Everett A. Butterfield, we were gradually whipped into an efficient machine. Corporals were made and unmade, sergeants came and went, and we were drilled. We had exchanged our hair mattresses for straw, our china for tin, our homes for barracks, and they made us like it. At first we occupied but one building, a rambling two-story affair having bunk rooms on all the upper floor. The lower floor was given over to a kitchen, mess hall, and recreation room. The recreation room, however, was short-lived, for as we grew in numbers, it became necessary to fill it with bunks, and when we had grown to full strength, 250 officers and men, we overflowed into another barracks, of which we occupied half of both upper and lower floors. The advantages of a billiard table, a piano, and a talking machine were ours. We supported a miniature barber shop and a tailor. Talent we had aplenty, and we ran our own shows. But we drilled, and we had schools, lots of them. When we were not doing the school of the soldier, we attended bayonet school. The school of the squad divided time with gas instruction. The study of the automatic rifle was complicated, but so was the school of the platoon. We practiced the manual of arms and learned how to throw hand grenades. Little by little, we were perfected in the art of thinking and knowing and doing the right thing at the right time. Early in 1918, we felt ready. On Washington's birthday, our division paraded down Fifth Avenue, a complete fighting machine. We were prepared for the next move, and the cheers of the crowds had barely died when it came. Upton to France, April 6th to April 20th. On the night of April 5th, we were ordered to roll packs. We stacked our bunks and drew ammunition, and we were posted on a vigil of waiting. April 6, 1918, Saturday, was the first anniversary of America's declaration of war. At 2:30 on that morning, in an air pleasantly crisp and flooded with moonlight, we marched to the railroad and entrained. Leaving Camp Upton at 3:15, we pulled into Long Island City, just in time to be greeted by the usual 6 o'clock factory whistles. A waiting ferry engulfed our battalion, and we were transported down the East River, around the Battery, and up the Hudson to Pier 59 at the foot of West 18th Street, Manhattan. A methodical transfer was accomplished from the squat and stunted ferry to the gigantic, but little known, Justicia. While still under process of construction in the shipyards at Belfast and Ireland for the Holland-American line, the Statendom was commandeered by Great Britain at the beginning of the European War and was operated as a transport under the name Justicia by the White Star Line. She was at the time the fifth largest vessel afloat, and that she was the especial prey of the German undersea navy is indicated by the fact that a submarine attacked her on a subsequent trip from England to the United States on July 20th, and after a dramatic engagement lasting some 24 hours, she was sunk. 14 of a crew of 700 were lost. All day, men and equipment poured onto the decks and into the hold of the giant transport. Our entire regiment and one battalion of the 308th Infantry were quartered between decks. Next morning before reveille, the Justicia slipped quietly down New York Bay, through Ambrose Channel, and into the Atlantic. B Company had no quarters deluxe. We were crowded into a small space, Section K, far down on D-deck, with sleeping hammocks slung over our mess tables. And our mess, served by the British, was a sorry series of meals. We were compelled to wear during the day and to sleep with during the night ungainly life preservers, but discomforts were subordinate to the interest in our new surroundings. The mysteries of the big ship, its spotless engine room, the intricacies of navigation, the precautions against possible attack, all held us. On leaving New York, we pursued a northerly course. At 9 o'clock that night, anchor was dropped in Lower Bedford Bay at Halifax. Early next morning we steamed up into the inner harbor, and before us lay the sadly devastated city of Halifax. Immense areas of the city had been totally destroyed by the explosion resulting from the collision between a Belgian relief ship and one bearing a cargo of explosives. That day and the next, while waiting for our convoy to assemble, was spent in practicing with lowered boats. Late on the afternoon of April 9th, our convoy of 10 passenger and cargo ships passed out of the harbor, sped by the cheers of the crews of 2 American battleships. We were escorted by USS St. Louis and HMS Victoria. Boat drill, a well-ordered scramble for lifeboats, took place twice daily. Each morning we indulged in strenuous sitting-up exercises in order that we might remain in trim. The practice with depth bombs and smoke screens helped to relieve the tedium of the long trip. As we neared our unknown destination, our escort was increased by 10 British torpedo boat destroyers. Veritable sea dogs they were, darting every which way, breasting wave after wave, ever watchful for the tricky Hun. And then on Friday, April 19th, land, just a ridge above the horizon, the blue hills of Wales, but already we could feel in our imaginations the solidity which our unsailorly legs had missed. As the day waned, we sighted the lighthouse at the mouth of the River Mersey. With cheers of relief, we were permitted to doff our bulky life belts. Just before dark, we entered the Mersey, passing closely by the beautiful seaside resort of New Brighton. Forging up the river, we reached Liverpool, and at 9 o'clock that evening, after almost 14 days afloat, our transport was moored. The city, as we saw it from the decks of the Justicia, lay quietly, with lights beginning to twinkle in the increasing gloom. One by one, the companies formed and debarked. At 11:15 p.m., B Company marched down the gangplank, through half-lighted sheds, into those curious side-door railway cars so peculiar to Europe. Exactly at midnight, our train pulled out of Liverpool. At 3 a.m., a short stop for hot coffee was made at Rugby, We passed through the outskirts of London at 6 a.m., and at 9:20 the train rolled into the terminal at Dover. The private yacht of Belgium's Queen Elizabeth had been pressed into service as a cross-channel ferry, and in this royal craft, under escort of destroyers, aeroplanes, and dirigibles, we crossed to Calais in an hour and 35 minutes. The crossing was enlivened when 2 riflemen of the crew took to firing at mines that endangered our passage. Picardy and Flanders, April 20th to June 10th. Once in Calais, we found that we divided honors with Company C of our regiment in being the first 2 National Army companies to land in France, having debarked on French soil April 20, 1918. That night we experienced our first real touch of war. Sheltered in tents in British Rest Camp No. 6, we received the call of welcome from a squadron of Jerry aeroplanes. A truly thrilling reception it was, with the thunder of the Hun bombs alternating with the ping of the British anti-aircraft guns, and through it all, the pat-pat of a multitude of machine guns. But best of all, there were no casualties. Next day we spent in adding to our equipment gas masks and trench helmets, and we exchanged our American Enfield rifles for British Enfields, lighter, shorter pieces, having a magazine capacity of 10 rounds of ammunition. April 23rd introduced us to the famous little 40 Hamis 8 chevaux boxcars of the French. A 3-hour journey in these brought us to the British base at Androuilly. Our first real hike started from here and ended at Zaquis, a little village in Picardy. We occupied some of the best sheep pens, cattle stalls, and hen roosts in town, and during our 5-week stay, we became really comfortable inhabitants. Zaquis proved to be a sort of military high school, where we polished our elementary knowledge of tactics. Our non-coms were sent to specialized schools in scouting, sniping, musketry, automatic rifles, grenades, and infantry tactics. The instruction, as well as the food and equipment, was distinctly British. 5 weeks of this work, and we took our next step trenchward, hiking from Zaquis at 1:30 a.m. May 13th, we entrained à la chevaux at Androuilly. A day's journey via Calais, Bourlon, Etaples, and Doullens brought us to Mondricourt in Flanders, then an almost heartbreaking hike through Paz to the war-worn village of Couin. Our assimilation by the British forces became most complete when we found ourselves brigaded with a battalion of the Lancashire Fusiliers of the 125th British Brigade. Our position was in reserve of the British lines, and southwest of Arras. Here, another 5 weeks of training gave us the right to work alone. Once again, we traded rifles, retrieving our American guns, and on June 6 we started on a 3-day march through Gazincourt, Bernaville, Alais, La Hauclachère to Point Remy, where we entrained. Vosges and the Lorraine, June 11th to August 7th. 2 days by rail, via Amiens, Versailles, Bar-le-Duc, and Nancy, and we detrained on June 11th at Théon in the Vosges. Then an intermittent hike with stops at Longchamps, Destoid, and Menil, passing through Rombevillers and Baccarat to Vacqueville in Lorraine. A stirring incident occurred en route when we passed the boys of the old 69th New York Regiment. Brooklyn hailed Brooklyn, Harlem called to Harlem, Bronx met Bronx. It was a breath of home to the already veteran 69th, and more than a cheering welcome to us. We shared Vacqueville with a battalion of the Alabama Regiment of the 42nd Rainbow Division. Advance parties were sent into the lines to acquaint themselves with the position we were to take over, and in the dead of night on June 20th through 21st, Company B took over that part of the line between Ancervillers and Badonvillers, designated as PC, Post Commandant, Hameau, and PC, Montreux. The 1st and 2nd platoons of our company held a position in the Grand Bois, Big Woods, a section of forest southeast of Ancervillers. The 2nd and 3rd platoons in company headquarters occupied the ruined village of St. Maurice. St. Maurice was a part of the line at this point, and had been subjected at different times to severe shelling. Only bare skeletons of buildings remained, and any nook or cranny between sections of walls and under a bit of roof was used as a shelter. Deserted cellars had been bolstered, reinforced, and barricaded so that they would serve as shell-proof protection in the event of an attack. The first gas attack. It was usually Fritz's intention to place a harassing barrage on any section of the line where he knew that a relief was being effected, but he was less watchful than usual when we went in. The enemy awoke, however, 3 days later on the morning of Monday, June 24th, and attacked our regimental outposts. In order to effectively prevent any assistance being rendered by the platoon stationed at St. Maurice, a heavy barrage was laid on the town beginning at 3:30 a.m. During the early part of the shelling, the continual use of HEs, high explosive shells, with an occasional gas shell, served to keep the men not only penned in their bomb-proof cellars, but also forced the continued use of gas masks. Gradually the HEs were interspersed with gas shells, until a point was reached where far more gas shells than high explosives fell into the town, resulting in a heavy blanket of phosgene, mustard, and lacrimatory gases settling over the position. The barrage did not lift until 6 a.m., and when it did, the platoons were forced to take a defensive position to guard against any possible success of the enemy. During the night before the attack, the men had been digging until a late hour on a system of trench defense. This entailed a lack of sleep, which, together with the continued wearing of the gas mask and the exposure endured immediately after the barrage, weakened their resistance to such an extent as to make them easy victims to the poisonous gases. 79 men were forced to the hospital by the effects of the combined phosgene and mustard. Among them were our first sergeant, supply and mess sergeants, all but one of our cooks, and both mechanics, which left us decidedly crippled. The shadow of our losses was deepened when we heard that Cook George Alberts, always popular, had died from gas inhaled while trying to prepare the company breakfast in a gas-filled kitchen. He was our first loss by death. An immediate result of our losses was the extra work shouldered by those who had escaped any of the serious effects. The men left in St. Maurice remained on constant guard until the company was relieved several days later. During the short rest period that followed, a reorganization of the company was accomplished, and we again entered the lines in July, taking over PCs Hameau and Montreux as before. The Daylight Raid. On Sunday, July 21st, a patrol of 52 men from our company, accompanied by 2 medical first aid men, engaged in a raid on the German trenches at 2:30 in the afternoon. The party advanced on the enemy lines in single file, divided in 4 groups, which were respectively commanded by Sergeant Todd, Captain Barrett, Sergeant Brombach, and Lieutenant Mulkey. The intent was to surprise the enemy with a daylight raid and thereby obtain information through capture and observation. But either through knowledge or by chance, the Germans had prepared against this maneuver, and the surprise was reversed. Waiting until our patrol was fairly within their lines and then partially surrounding them, the enemy centered upon our men a deadly fire of rifles, machine guns, and grenades. The raiders fought valiantly in return, but were outnumbered 4-1. After an hour's fighting, 17 of our party, including Captain Barrett, lay dead, and 16 were captured. Of the 21 who returned, 13 were wounded. We were informed by 2 German prisoners captured a few days later that 17 Germans had been killed. The loss sustained in this daylight raid occasioned considerable comment, chiefly because it was generally believed that Captain Barrett had misread his orders, that the time for action had really read 2:30 a.m. instead of 2:30 p.m. This, however, is quite untrue, inasmuch as all the company officers, as well as the supply sergeant and company clerk, were conversant with the orders. Captain Barrett's immediate battalion and regimental superiors were present at or near the time of action, and possessed full knowledge of the entire plan. The defeat was caused solely by the lack of the intended element of surprise. Whether or not the enemy had possession of our plans, and if they had possession, how they obtained it, is something we shall never know. A telegram was received by the divisional commander from General Headquarters to the effect that the entire action had been investigated and found credible. The casualties suffered from the raid, together with those resulting from the gas attack of June 24th, so depleted the company as to make an immediate relief imperative, and that same night Company L took over our sector. A subsequent reorganization of the entire regiment distributed the men of the various companies so that all would have an equal strength. Our numbers were so few that we lost none of our men in this process, but instead received increases not only from many of the other companies, but also from the 76th New England Division. As tribute to those men whom we had lost, a Company V Mass was held at the Catholic Church in Vauqueville, at which Chaplain Father Walsh of our battalion officiated. The entire strength of the company was present. Another rest and another turn up front, after which the entire division was relieved by the 37th Ohio and Kentucky Division. Once again we crossed the Visages, halting for 3 days at Saronville. Leaving there, we bivouacked for a night in the Forêt de Chamis, and entrained at Chamis the next morning, August 7th, at dawn. End of Section 1. Section 2 of the History of Company B, 307th Infantry, compiled by Julius KLAUSNER. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Section 2. From Vasile to the Aunts, August 10th to September 15th. 2 days later, August 10th, we took transport on an immense train of motor trucks, lorries we called them, after the English. They were driven by Indo-Chinese, serving under the French. After 9 cramped but interesting hours, we passed through Chateau Thierry. Our trip ended at Fier in Tordinos. For 3 days we camped in a small wood, and then we moved to a position supporting the attack on Fesmis. We were stationed in the Bois de la Passade, adjoining the Forêt de Nassau. While there, we were engaged in digging a series of reserve trenches near Mont-sur-Corvel. On August 28th, the battalion moved around Chery-Chartreville to a position east of La Prise Farm. September 1st, we again shifted, this time crossing the Vasile and relieving the 3rd Battalion just east of Beausejour. Here we repulsed a raiding party, inflicting heavy losses upon the enemy. We were then moved to a ravine, which gave us the opportunity of taking a 2-day rest. Our next move brought us to face with the enemy just south of Merville, where we took a position in an exposed field, the only protection being the individual funk holes which had been deserted by the retreating German troops. After 3 days of little water and practically no food, at 5:30 on the afternoon of September 8th, still brilliant daylight, we crawled from our funk holes, and each squad, in single file in formation known as squad columns, we advanced against German artillery in an effort to straighten the line. As we reached the outskirts of Merville, we were subjected to an intense barrage of HEs, suffering the loss of 4 men killed and 5 injured. No gain was made by this sortie, and we drew back to our funk hole position, awaiting further developments. Early on the morning of September 14th, supported by a barrage laid down by combined American, French, and Italian artillery, we attacked the enemy position that lay on the far side of the ravine Merville. The advance was made down the side of the valley in the face of a withering fire of enemy machine guns. Though suffering heavy casualties, our progress was unchecked, and we swarmed up the opposite slope with undiminished vigor. So rapid were our gains that we had to pause to allow our flanks to catch up. Our 3rd platoon was so far ahead of the line of advance as to be mistaken by the commander of the cooperating French forces for a body of the enemy, and it required considerable persuasion to correct his misconception. The day's end saw the German horde driven across the Aunts, and we were well beyond our original objective. But we had advanced true to form. Commenting on a previous attack made by another American unit, a French officer remarked, "The Americans, they are fools. Tell them to take 1 trench, and they take 3. We had been operating on the line of the Vasile with several divisions, but the 77th was the only American division to drive its way to the Aunts. Our gains were paid for with numerous casualties, and when we received our relief it was thoroughly welcome. It had been our longest consecutive stretch in the front line, and we suffered not only from battle losses, but we had also endured the utmost privation. Short rations, little water, exposed positions, and the constant necessity for watchfulness had undermined our strength to an unusual degree. We had been operating on the will to accomplish rather than on food and water. An Italian unit relieved our company, and we withdrew to a reserve position in the Vasile Valley, east of Fesmis. Here on the night of September 16th, our division was relieved by an Italian division, and we pulled out of the sector. We looked forward to a period of rest, but it was not to be. 20 kilometers of hiking brought us to the Arcis-les-Ponsarts forest, where we bivouacked for a day, then into lorries for an all-night ride to Le Chantellier-sur-Marne, where our losses were replaced by a detachment from the 40th Sunshine Division. 2 days of speculating as to our chances for a rest terminated when on the night of September 20th we were ordered to roll packs. We stepped off on a 32-kilometer hike at 1 a.m. via Saint-Manaud and Florent, and 17 hours later we dragged ourselves into the Forêt de Massons Petites, where we were quartered in barracks at the edge of the Argonne Forest. The Argonne, September 26th to November 11th. The memorable and decisive drive known as the Argonne Meuse Offensive started on September 26th. That day found us entrenched near the main road at Florent, a position in reserve of the 1st Army Corps. Actual operations were started that night when the entire cannon of 100 divisions poured forth on the enemy its scorching fire. Next morning we moved to a position north of Florent, and 3 days later we moved through the town of Le Four de Paris into those trenches north of La Harazie that had been deserted by the 122nd German Regiment of the 2nd Landwehr Division. The Lost Battalion. October 2nd, we left the reserve and assumed a support position. On that day the forces in the line drove forward, but in the execution of the advance, companies E, H, I, K, L, and M of the 308th Infantry and Company K of the 307th Infantry found themselves trapped by the enemy on a hill north of Buis-de-la-Bouillon. These units were the only ones to reach their objective, but by thus advancing ahead of their flanks, they gave the enemy an opportunity to surround them. In this hazardous position, they struggled as the Lost Battalion. We went forward to their relief on October 4th, but were held back by the effective machine gun fire of the enemy. Next day, we again strove to extricate the besieged battalion, but again we failed. Certain enemy machine guns were so placed that their hail of death was impassable. They seemed an insurmountable obstacle in the path of the entire 307th Infantry. The men of Company B knew that the machine gun positions of the enemy must be taken. There was nothing at that moment which counted more than the capture of these positions. So on October 6th we attacked, giving no thought to risk. We did what we thought would have been impossible before we knew that it had to be done. Persistently we attacked in the face of the enemy fire, and as the German resistance gradually weakened, we took the heretofore impregnable positions. 7 of our men were that day cited for exceptional bravery. On October 7th, our division organized a concerted attack on the German lines. We realized the awful plight of the Lost Battalion, and all day we fought against the enemy machine gun nests. One by one they were silenced, and at 5 p.m., Company B alone of all the division succeeded in reaching and saving the Lost Battalion. The Germans were driven beyond the hill, and once more the line was straightened out. Grand Prix. Another week, and we had driven the Germans across the river Arie. We remained in a clump of woods until October 16th, and then, not even waiting for our engineers to throw their bridges across the Arie, we waded the river and drove against Grand Prix, which was the keystone of the enemy defense in the sector opposed by our division. We were stubbornly opposed by the 253rd German Infantry of the 76th Reserve Division. Again and again we assaulted the position, and finally, after a running fight through the streets, the town was ours, and the American wedge was in a fair way to split the entire German defense. We pulled out of the line on October 17th and withdrew 10 kilometers to a small forest near Apremont, being relieved by the 78th New Jersey Division. As usual, there was no rest, and on October 21st we moved to Fleville for a 3-day stretch of trench digging. October 31st was spent in digging trenches in the Shadow Valley. We resumed our activities at the front on November 2nd, keeping in mind that half injunction, half promise, credited to General Pershing. Hell, heaven, or Hoboken by Christmas. We gave little thought to heaven and less to hell, but we were beginning to long for Hoboken, and went forward with irresistible determination. Hiking via Saint-Juvin to Thénaguise, we loaded onto motor trucks. Unloading close to the lines, we swung into immediate action, and on November 3rd, we wrested the village of Fontenoy from the 45th German Reserve Division, the following day capturing the village of Auquois from the 76th German Reserve Division. Stenay. Stenay, a village of strategical importance, was next selected by the enemy as a point of resistance. On November 5th, the combined strength of our entire regiment was hurled against the 195th German Division, and Stein fell to us. The capture succeeded in liberating a French population that for 4 years had been under the dominance of an enemy army. The enemy by this time was retreating fast, and so closely did we press them, we were far in advance of our cannon. The progress of the big guns was much delayed by poor roads, but the spirit of the victors was in us all, and little did we miss our artillery. In quick succession, we took town after town, the enemy losing to us in one day, November 6th, the villages of Raycourt, Haraucourt, Angicourt, and Remoulay. The terror-stricken Hun gave little resistance, and we kept within 5 minutes of their rear guard. The Armistice. We came to a halt on the banks of the Meuse, 4 miles from the historic city of Sedan, and after augmenting our depleted ranks by replacement from the 38th Cyclone Division, we organized for what we hoped would be our final attack. But the final attack had already been made. The unconquerable Argonne had been conquered. A ruthless enemy was vanquished. Germany sued for peace with defeat, rather than face peace with death. The last shot was fired at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, and we rested on our arms, worn and tired, but victorious and happy. The joy of accomplishment was ours, and we celebrated the declaration of the armistice in a spirit far more triumphant than relieved. On November 12th, the same French who had laughed at us in pity as we shouldered their task in the Argonne hailed us with gratitude as they took over our positions. The march from the Meuse to our rest base in the Châteauvillion area took 24 days and covered 300 kilometers. It was an intermittent hike, and we stopped successively at Le Brelier, Aix, Haricourt, Fleville, La Fort-de-Paris, Florent, Surveilles-sur-Ante, Noyers, Andernay, Horicourt, Éclairons, Fresnay, Maisons, and Bailleul, arriving at our base in Lanty on December 5th. It was soon apparent that although we had been spared the alternatives, we were still not going to see Hoboken before Christmas, so we made ourselves comfortable and settled down to a long stay. It was necessary to the maintenance of discipline and the morale of the army that drill should be continued, and as well as any recruit, we were once again schooled in the finesse of the salute, the art of the right face, and the strategy of shoulder arms. We engaged in maneuvers to practice the lessons that we had learned in the Argonne, and we passed in reviews before princes, generals, and congressmen. Time passed, not too quickly, but still it passed. Christmas 1918. Christmas was not the dreary day a Christmas away from home usually is. We had much for which to be thankful, and the intervening miles between Lanty and home were no bar to those good wishes that came from our folks. We celebrated, we ate, we played Santa Claus. A tree was erected in the center of the village, and we passed out to the civilian population candy and biscuits and tobacco. The women and children and men sincerely appreciated our tokens, and happiness reigned. The mess sergeant had an inspiration of genius, and he served us with a truly Christmas dinner. New Year's Day was red-lettered with another meal worthy of our mess sergeant's reputation. The holiday season was over, and we entered upon the new year full of new hopes and ambitions. Home. Not until February 9th was another move made. Then, in freight car, we journeyed to the Le Mans area, detraining at Palais, from whence we hiked to La Roche's farm near Auvers-les-Hermans. April 15th, we entrained at Sable for Brest, where we were quartered at Camp Upton. On April 19th, exactly 1 year after our arrival at Liverpool, we were lighted out to the United States Transport, America. A fast ship and smooth waters combined to give us a rapid and enjoyable voyage, and we docked at Hoboken at 9 a.m., April 28th. We proceeded to Camp Mills, Mineola, Long Island, where immediate passes gave us the opportunity to greet our home folks, eat home meals, and sleep in regular beds. The company moved on May 5th to the armory of the 22nd New York Engineers in New York City to await final orders for the parade of welcome arranged by New York City. We formed for the parade near Washington Square at 8 a.m. next morning, and at 10 a.m. we marched out to Fifth Avenue and swept up that thoroughfare to the acclaim of a million throats. No greeting could have been more sincere, no welcome more impressive, and this, our last hike as Company B, was a march of glory. We returned to Camp Upton, our first station and our last, and we were demobilized on May 9, 1919, to return to our respective states. Ours was a truly American company, composed of true and representative Americans. Our homes lay in 32 different states, scattered between New York and Maine in the east, Minnesota and the Dakotas in the north, Utah, Oregon, and California in the west, and Texas, Louisiana, and Florida in the south. So ends the history of Company B. We were mustered out of the service military, but the spirit that withstood the Lorraine, the valor that gained the Aunts, and the fire that conquered the Argonne lives on, and we have banded ourselves together so that we may, in the words of our commander, Major General Robert Alexander, serve our country as well in peace as we did in war. End of Section 2 of the History of Company B, 307th Infantry, by Julius KLAUSNER, Jr. Section 3. of the History of Company B, 307th Infantry, by Julius KLAUSNER, Jr. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. They Sleep. George Alberts, Claire Andrews, Barney Bardman, DSC, Blanton Barrett, Christian A. Batty, Raphael Bebo, John Blackburn, Jacob Borker, Hugh A. Brady, Louis Brith, William F. Brophy, Claude C. Brower, Frank W. Burke, Michael Carlo, Walter Cassidy, Frank Charles, James Connor, James L. Cronin, Richard Cullen, John P. Dolan, Joseph V. Domkus, Hyman Fishfanger, Robert Flanagan, James Folliott, Jr., Irving H. Friedman, Hugo Gabardin, George E. Garrett, John Grove, Clarence I. Grubbs, Joseph P. Hanley, Sally Hausner, George L. Hickey, Charles L. Corrin, Joseph Case, John E. Kelly, Peter Knabb, Michael McCormick, Martin McHugh, Andrew McKinley, W. Allen Matthews, Earl Millsap, DSC, Royal E. Morris, Charles Munzinger, Albert W. Nickerson, Private Noonan, William Otto, Albert C. Peterson, DSC, Ernest W. Peterson, Private Plowman, Albert Pritchard, William R. Reed, DSC, John P. Reinert, Albert J. Robert, James Robinson, W. Rozachuk, George F. Russell, Elmer O. Sellers, Private Schildknecht, Benjamin Silverman, Frank Skeets, Frank Staniski, Joseph Strauss, Maurice Watchell, James Walsh, G. H. Woods, Paul Zukaski. The roster of Company B. Major Weston C. Jenkins, DSC, 208 West Thomas Street, Rome, New York. Major Fred A. Tillman, Legion of Honor, 19 Commercial Street, Boston, Massachusetts. Captain Blanton Barrett, deceased, Chambly, Georgia. Asterisk. Captain Everett A. Butterfield, Black Star, Lambs Club, New York. Captain Philip Cheney, South Manchester, Connecticut. Captain Alexander D.V. Pratt, 120 Broadway, New York. Captain Alonzo D. Slagle, address unknown. Captain Howard S. Smith, New Haven, Connecticut. First Lieutenant Joseph D. M. Adrian, Jr., 50 Broad Street, New York. First Lieutenant Marcus L. Chasins, 27 William Street, New York. First Lieutenant Alexander J. Gillespie, 251 West 81st Street, New York. First Lieutenant Kenneth C. Lincoln, 29 Bedford Street, Fall River, Massachusetts. First Lieutenant George S. Mott, Scranton, Pennsylvania. First Lieutenant William R. Reed, DSC, deceased, Brooklyn, New York. First Lieutenant Harry R. Wyman, St. Louis, Missouri. Second Lieutenant Atwood, New York City. Second Lieutenant William Elliott, Long Island, New York. Second Lieutenant Clarence I. Grubbs, deceased, Kansas City, Missouri. Second Lieutenant Foster A. Gunn, Main Street, Ottawa, Kansas. Second Lieutenant Arthur J. Hamblin, 150 West 106th Street, New York. Lieutenant F. Hardig, address unknown. Lieutenant Hardin, Yale Club, New York. Lieutenant Harrison McCann, 2156 Cortelyou Road, Brooklyn, New York. Second Lieutenant George C. Mulkey, 816 Grand Avenue, Racine, Wisconsin. Second Lieutenant O'Connell, deceased, New York City. Second Lieutenant Thomas O. Sullivan, New York City. Second Lieutenant William Randall, New York City. Second Lieutenant James Schofield, 88 Main Street, North Andover, Massachusetts. Second Lieutenant Austin W. Wolford, Virginia. Asterisk. First Lieutenant William F. Baber, 417 East 75th Street, New York. Asterisk. First Lieutenant Arthur D. Brombach, 41 Division Street, New Rochelle, New York. Asterisk. First Lieutenant Raymond S. Hill, East St. Louis, Illinois. Asterisk. First Lieutenant Euclid L. Levasseur, Farmers Loan and Trust Company, Paris, France. Asterisk. Second Lieutenant Herbert H. Harris, 1445 Broadway, New York. Asterisk. Second Lieutenant Arthur S. Hoyt, 71 Broadway, New York. Asterisk. Second Lieutenant Paul F. Honeywell, 287 Main Street, Winthrop, Massachusetts. Asterisk. Lieutenant Lewis Katz, New York City. Asterisk. Lieutenant W. Allen Matthews, deceased, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Asterisk. Second Lieutenant David H. Rose, 915 Intervale Avenue, New York. Asterisk. Second Lieutenant Edgar L. Schwartz, 10 West 93rd Street, New York. The officers before whose name has been placed an asterisk were commissioned from the enlisted ranks of Company B and assigned to duty with other organizations. Elwin Abbott, 188 Crescent Street, Rutland, Vermont. Samuel Abramson, Nicollet, Minnesota. Clarence R. Ackerley, 624 Broad Street, Bridgeport, Connecticut. Alan Adams, 68 West 102nd Street, New York. James Adams, 107 West 89th Street, New York. Adolph Albrecht, 190 East 3rd Street, New York. Carl Aldrich, Glen Allen, Alabama. Fred Alexander, Carterville, Illinois. M. Albert, Watertown, New York. Marquise Ambrosio, 412 North 21st Street, Herrin, Illinois. Samuel Anders, McConnells, Alabama. Lloyd C. Anderson, Binghamton, New York. Robert Angles, Route 2, Bethpage, Tennessee. Paul Anello, Box 19, Bristol, Connecticut. Hugo Antonelli, 732 Nostrand Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Paul Antonelli, 732 Nostrand Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Nathan Aronson, 26 Norman Street, Salem, Mass. Isaac Asher, 111 Havershop Street, Boston. Elmer O. Barber, Hillsboro, Oregon. Luke M. Bardenson, Valere, Vermont. Robert Barr, 108 West 49th Street, New York. John Berry, Newburgh, New York. Harry Bartlett, Minden, Utah. Fred C. Batchelor, 260 Laurel Street, Hartford, Connecticut. Thomas Baxter, 604 North Main Street, Butte, Montana. Herman Beck, 84 Rivington Street, New York. Louis Beckdorf, Brooklyn, New York. William Bell, 158 East 107th Street, New York. Earl D. Bennett, Route 3, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. David Bennett, 438 52nd Street, Brooklyn, New York. Thomas Bennett, Seymour, Connecticut. Fred Burge, Bismarck, North Dakota. Edward Bulma, Hill, Montana. Paul D. Bond, 208 Cedar Avenue, Richmond Hill, New York. J. A. Boyle, Long Island City, New York. Leslie Bradney, Pangbourne, Arkansas. Charles H. Bradshaw, 179 Bainbridge Street, Brooklyn, New York. Michael Bresnan, 95 Myrtle Avenue, Ansonia, Connecticut. Ralph U. Brett, 701 West 178th Street, New York. William Bruner, 193 Ann Street, Newburgh, New York. Harry Buckley, Columbia, Mississippi. Volney Burnett, Box 464, Buell, Idaho. George Busco, Breckenridge, Minnesota. Paul Calandra, 3 8th Street, Rochester, New York. Frank Camp, Route 10, Shelbyville, Indiana. James Carlin, 1115 Portland Avenue, Woodhaven, New York. Albert Carlson, Route 5, Hillsboro, Oregon. Charles J. Carolin, 497 Chauncey Street, Brooklyn, New York. Thomas Carroll, 1894 3rd Avenue, New York. Amadeo Caruso, 254 Allen Street, Buffalo, New York. Gregory Kavanaugh, 298 Lockwood Avenue, Buffalo, New York. Tony Schermante, 2134 Moody Avenue, Chicago. Nordal Chilson, Blue Earth, Minnesota. Nell C. Christensen, Route 31, Tyler, Minnesota. Isidore Cohen, 71 West 115th Street, New York. Leroy Canet, 2412 Roosevelt Avenue, Indianapolis, Indiana. Patrick Conway, New York. Frederick Combs, Freeport, New York. Joseph Corsica, 830 Cortlandt Avenue, New York. Leo Covert, Newburgh, New York. Edward M. Cremens, 38 Maiden Street, Birmingham, New York. Michael J. Cudmore, 12 Mygot Street, Binghamton, New York. Joseph Covington, Meridian, Mississippi. George Dahlquist, Winchester, Massachusetts. Walter L. Dom, Sullivan, Illinois. Antonio DeSantis, 768 Vernon Avenue, Long Island City, New York. George Deigel, 22 Wisner Avenue, Newburgh, New York. A. James DiMaggio, 83 Old Town Road, Staten Island, New York. Hugh A. Donnelly, 240 Ansley Street, Brooklyn, New York. Abraham Drazen, 446 East 145th Street, New York. Fred Durham, Toluca, Illinois. Edward J. Dwyer, 523 North Division Street, Buffalo, New York. Elisha Eves, Route 3, Macon, Mississippi. Harold Ekstrom, 148 East 54th Street, New York. William Ehrman, 138 Carlton Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Max Eisenberg, 547 83rd Street, Brooklyn, New York. Elwin M. Eldridge, 780 Jefferson Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Louis Ellenbogen, 531 Bedford Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Ezra Epstein, 109 8th Avenue, New York. Anthony Esposito, South Nyack, New York. Josiah E. Evans, 90 High Street, Ansonia, Connecticut. Thomas J. Fisher, Lincoln Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Donald Fitzgerald, Wallerville, Mississippi. Jerry Flanagan, 76 Michigan Avenue, Buffalo, New York. Albert Plass, 121 Ash Street, Buffalo, New York. M. Fontanetta, 453 East 186th Street, New York. Charles Friedman, 107 East 2nd Street, New York. Herschel Friedman, 215 Caldwell Avenue, New York. Samuel Friedman, 634 Kosciuszko Street, Brooklyn, New York. Richard Gadd, 375 61st Street, Brooklyn, New York. Leslie Gaines, 713 South Hudson Avenue, Denniston, Texas. George Gibson, Kimball, South Dakota. J. Joseph Gillig, 324 East 4th Street, Mount Vernon, New York. Leslie Gleason, St. Mary's Home, Binghamton, New York. Fred A. Guy Forst, 56 Freedom Avenue, Richmond Hill, New York. John E. Glenn, 232 Jackson Street, Brooklyn, New York. Samuel Goldberg, 647 East 5th Street, New York. Ira Gomer, Marion, PA. Rossi Goody, Prairie Elk, Montana. Max Gordon, 761 Blake Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. John Greamy, 171 East 99th Street, New York. Max Green, 1033 Hoe Avenue, New York. Herman Greening, 1029 Sherman Avenue, South Bend, Indiana. Frank Garcia, 612 Fort Hamilton Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Edward E. Haig, Route 3, Ronby, Minnesota. Harry Hagan, Box Elder, Montana. P. M. Hagan, Lansford, North Dakota. Virgil M. Hale, Case Creek, Arkansas. William J. Halpern, Dixwell Drive, New Haven, Connecticut. Chris Hansen, Hannaford, North Dakota. Gilrock Hansen, Route 1, Creston, Montana. Theodore Harris, 500 West 175th Street, New York. Michael Hartnett, Main Street, Ansonia, Connecticut. Richard Hayden, Derby, Connecticut. Raymond Healy, 547 West 186th Street, New York. Alfred Heller, 461 Steinway Avenue, Astoria, New York. John Hinchy, 172 East 112th Street, New York. Austin Hinchy, Goshen, New York. James Heron, Englewood, New Jersey. Joseph Holland, Heber Springs, Arkansas. Carl Holmes, Lambert Paper Company, Salt Lake City, Utah. Carol Honeycutt, Burnsville, Mississippi. William F. Howard, 315 6th Street, Brooklyn, New York. John Hudson, Newburgh, New Jersey. Ernest C. Hutchings, Manahasset, New York. John Jackson, Box 145, Troy, Indiana. Leslie Jacobs, Broadway, Grandview, New York. Harry Jensen, Route 9, Penyan, New York. Kenneth Jensen, Shelley, Idaho. Edward T. Johnson, Elkland, PA. Robert R. Johnson, Newburgh, New York. Julius Kaplan, 15 Walnut Street, New Rochelle, New York. Harry Kaufman, 1652 Madison Avenue, New York. Edward Kelly, 352 West 18th Street, New York. John F. Kelly, Adler, Montana. J. H. Kiernan, 575 Main Street, Wareham, Massachusetts. W. Claire Kiernan, 402 2nd Street, Brooklyn, New York. Edward N. Kipp, 19 Charlotte Street, Binghamton, New York. Terrence Kirk, 3 Hill Street, Granton, New Jersey. Julius Klausner, Jr., 324 East 4th Street, Mount Vernon, New York. George A. Klein, Jr., 95 Vernon Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Wallace S. Klein, Route 3, Neshoba, Tennessee. Frank X. Colts, Davenport's Neck, New Rochelle, New York. Peter Koch, Box 96, Stickney, South Dakota. Anthony Cochran, Box 1000, Growanda, New York. Jack Konowich, Lackawanna, New York. Reuben Koplowitz, 236 New Jersey Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Harvey L. Krishner, North Springville, Staten Island, New York. Richard Lamb, Brooklyn, New York. Arthur Latman, Box 517, Hibbing, Minnesota. Samuel Lepidus, 136 Clinton Street, New York. Timothy Leary, 427 West 13th Street, New York. David Leff, 91 Throop Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Patrick Linehan, 249 West 135th Street, New York. Samuel Leisowitz, 1865 Park Place, Brooklyn, New York. Isaac Leibowitz, 531 Dumont Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Harry Lippman, 33 Montgomery Street, New York. Carl Lucas, 41 Water Street, Ansonia, Connecticut. James J. Linden, 68 Gansford Street, New York. Thomas McCann, 709 West Dominic Street, Rome, New York. John McGinley, 183 Kingsland Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Arthur McManus, 199 Howard Avenue, Ansonia, Connecticut. Walter K. McNair, 26 East Avenue, Gasport, New York. James J. Malone, 28 Sedway Street, Buffalo, New York. William Manns, 1275 3rd Street, New York. John Merrill, Newburgh, New York. Waclaw McIsaac, Beacon Falls, Connecticut. William Meyer, 1919 7th Avenue, New York. James Menzies, 13A Green Street, Everett, Massachusetts. E.R. Mirowitz, 371 Vernon Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Ray Milburn, Keensburg, Illinois. Herbert Millville, RFD 14, LaSalle, New York. Joseph P. Monahan, 706 Woodlawn Avenue, Wilmington, Delaware. Richard Morgan, DeWitt, Arkansas. David M. Maroney, 337 West 12th Street, New York. Thad L. Morris, Crenshaw, Mississippi. Edward Murphy, 56 West 105th Street, New York. Maurice Murphy, 124 Adelphi Street, Brooklyn, New York. Stephen A. Murphy, 108 8th Avenue, New York. Harold Nicholson, Fulton, Minnesota. Morgan Norris, Cashin, Oklahoma. Charles A. O'Brien, 1002 East 98th Street, Brooklyn, New York. John O'Kino, 6 Hanover Square, New York. Carl O. Ferding, 48 Penn Avenue, Binghamton, New York. Daniel O'Neill, 951 Lafayette Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. S. Oshinsky, Ward's Island, New York. Gilbert Paneth, 326 East 91st Street, New York. Gustav Pankratz, 17 Madison Street, Rochester. Benjamin Parker, 77 Kingsbury Street, Waterbury, Connecticut. Elmer Patterson, Burt, New York. George Peterson, Kimbalta, Iowa. Julian Paluzzi, 59 Hall Place, West Quincy, Massachusetts. John Prescott, 305 Webster Street, Monterey, California. Porter Priest, Mount Morrison, Florida. Andrew R. Purcella, 128 Caroline Street, Derby, Connecticut. John J. Quinn, Main Street, Beacon Falls, Connecticut. Patrick J. Quinn, 155 McConnell Avenue, Buffalo. Isidore Rebelski, 55 Avenue C, New York. Vito Racino, 1946 First Avenue, New York. Robert Radford, 112 Wilson Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Joseph Ranoni, 438 East 106th Street, New York. Casey J. Reed, Prospect, Tennessee. Ralph Reed, Route A, St. Petersburg, Florida. Frank Reed, 967 Madison Street, Brooklyn, New York. Edward Rennie, 29 Franklin Street, Binghamton, New York. George F. Roberts, 15 Ivy Street, Elmhurst, New York. Johannes Rodenberg, Star Route, Columbia, Iowa. Howard F. Roding, 97 Miller Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Harry Rossler, 409 16th Street, Brooklyn, New York. John A. Ross, 14 First Street, Brooklyn, New York. Alexander Racino, 228 Myrtle Avenue, Buffalo. Theodore Rubenstein, 215 4th Avenue, New York. Frank Russell, Carthage, Tennessee. James Serreri, Box 176, Oyster Bay, New York. Edward Sassy, 204 5th Avenue, Astoria, New York. Clyde Savage, 80 Maple Street, Bangor, Maine. Thomas J. Scanlon, 354 West 12th Street, New York. William Schaefer, East Topper Street, Buffalo, New York. Sigmund Schultz, 748 9th Avenue, LIC, NY. Harry Schwartz, 702 East 5th Street, New York. Carl Schwartz, Jamaica Creek, Springfield Gardens, New York. Fred E. Shattuck, 151 Ridgewood Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Harry Shapiro, 230 East 115th Street, New York. Eris M. Shellman, 303 West 111th Street, New York. Carl Schubert, Suffolk, Montana. Abraham Siegel, 251 Amboy Street, Brooklyn, New York. Morris Silver, 210 Riverdale Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. William Simpson, 620 Hudson Street, New York. William Skeets, Lockport, New York. William Slater, South Dartmouth, Massachusetts. William Smith, Inglewood, California. W. E. Snyder, Binghamton, New York. Lee Solomon, Palmyra, Illinois. Arthur D. Soper, 28 Huron Street, East Lynn, Massachusetts. Soren Sorensen, Rutan, Minnesota. Jacob Squire, 568 Grand Street, Brooklyn, New York. Christopher Staudigal, 153 Bleecker Street, Brooklyn, New York. Brody Stewart, Rutherford, Tennessee. Earl C. Stewart, White Pine, Tennessee. William J. Strong, RFD 12, Springville, Alabama. Otis Summers, Dwyer, Tennessee. Martin Swinson, Wetumpka, South Dakota. Thomas Swinehart, 223 East Hendrick Street, Shelbyville, Indiana. Philip Tasman, 155 Hickory Street, Buffalo, New York. Dudley Taylor, Turner, Oregon. James Taylor, Newmarket, Tennessee. Norman Taylor, Ashley, Montana. R.F. Taylor, Binghamton, New York. Volney O. Thompson, Honesdale, Idaho. Voss Thompson, Honesdale, Idaho. Monroe Todd, Allen, South Carolina. Diorado Tortora, 7 Wood Point Road, Brooklyn, New York. Ray Turk, 6 Cedar Street, Binghamton, New York. Thomas F. Twyford, 807 East 8th Street, Brooklyn, New York. John Urban, 28 Crandall Street, Binghamton, New York. Hillary Vaughn, Briggsville, Arkansas. John P. Vaughn, 567 East Avenue, Akron, Ohio. Modestino Veccarino, 16 Durand Street, Danbury, Connecticut. Fred Beamer, 11 Meadow Street, Seymour, Connecticut. Joseph Bistine, Wappinger Falls, New York. Abraham Wald, 238 24th Street, New York. Cleve Wallace, Dyersburg, Tennessee. Donald M. Wallach, 71 East 92nd Street, New York. Harry Wernert, Eagle Grove, Iowa. John J. Whalen, Binghamton, New York. Pearl Whittington, Gloucester, Mississippi. Lee Wilkerson, Winchester, Arkansas. Joseph Will, 12 Alice Street, Rochester, New York. Roland H. Williams, 25 Summerfield Place, Staten Island, New York. Edward J. Williamson, Jeffrey, Louisiana. Albert G. Wilson, Jr., 403rd Street, Brooklyn, New York. William Wilson, 240 Chestnut Street, Lockport, New York. Charles O. Woods, Beaver, Oregon. Merton Yandes, 115 South Union Street, Rochester, New York. Louis Yasner, 190 Floyd Street, Brooklyn, New York. Samuel Jashinsky, 381 Leonard Street, Brooklyn, New York. Edward P. Zellner, Strikersville, New York. All hail the brave. Courage, that fidelity to purpose despite physical welfare, is a natural attribute of the soldier. But there are those exceptional deeds of valor that are committed beyond the right of expectation. They are deeds that combine the highest intelligence with the utmost bravery. They are those instances of self-sacrificial service that are rendered not with thought of hardship, nor of pain, nor of reward, but only with the hope that the foundations of our country and our homes remain unshaken. Star indicates a posthumous award. Asterisk denotes those who were killed after their citation. Star, Private First Class Barney Bardman, Distinguished Service Cross, Brooklyn, New York. Star, Private Earl Millsap, Distinguished Service Cross, Asotin, Washington. Star, Private Albert C. Peterson, Distinguished Service Cross, Stacy, Minnesota. Star, First Lieutenant William R. Reed, Distinguished Service Cross, Brooklyn, New York. Major Weston C. Jenkins, Distinguished Service Cross, Rome, New York. Major Fred A. Tillman, Chevalier, Legion d'Honneur de France, Ulster, PA. Captain Everett A. Butterfield, French Order of the Black Star, New York. Divisional Citations. Captain Alexander D.B. Pratt, New York. Star, Second Lieutenant Clarence I. Grubbs, Kansas City, Missouri. Second Lieutenant Arthur J. Hamlin, New York. Second Lieutenant F. Hardy, address unknown. Second Lieutenant Kenneth C. Lincoln, Fall River, Massachusetts. Second Lieutenant Harry R. Wyman, St. Louis, Missouri. Sergeant Lloyd C. Anderson, Binghamton, New York. Sergeant Charles H. Bradshaw, Brooklyn, New York. Private First Class Louis Beckendorf, Brooklyn, New York. Asterisk, Private Jacob Borker, Brooklyn, New York. Sergeant Ralph U. Brett, New York. Private First Class George Busco, Breckenridge, Minnesota. Asterisk, Private James Connor, New York. Corporal Patrick Conway, New York. Sergeant Edward M. Crimmins, Binghamton, New York. Sergeant A. James DiMaggio, Staten Island, New York. Private First Class Hugh A. Donnelly, Brooklyn, New York. Corporal Edward J. Dwyer, Buffalo, New York. Private William Ehrman, Brooklyn, New York. Sergeant Josiah E. Evans, Ansonia, Connecticut. Private First Class John Yearney, New York. Private First Class P. M. Hagan, Lansford, North Dakota. Corporal Gilrock Hanson, Creston, Montana. Sergeant William F. Howard, Brooklyn, New York. Sergeant Ernest C. Hutchings, Manistee, New York. Private First Class Robert R. Johnson, Newburgh, New York. Private John F. Kelly, Adler, Montana. Sergeant George A. Klein, Jr., Brooklyn, New York. Sergeant Harvey A. Kreusner, Staten Island, New York. Private First Class James J. Linden, New York. Sergeant Joseph P. Monahan, Wilmington, Delaware. Star, Private Alfred Nickerson, Lewiston, New York. Private Andrew R. Pusella, Derby, Connecticut. Sergeant John A. Ross, Brooklyn, New York. Star, Sergeant George F. Russell, Brooklyn, New York. Private First Class Thomas J. Scanlon, New York. Sergeant Eris M. Shellman, New York. Star, Private First Class Joseph Strauss, New York. Sergeant Monroe Todd, Allen, South Carolina. Star, Private J. Robinson, Newfane, New York. Private Volney O. Thompson, Honesdale, Idaho. Corporal Frederick Beamer, Seymour, Connecticut. Sergeant Donald M. Wallach, New York. The Burt Kelly Post. The spirit of dominant Americanism with which the war was fought seems in these times of peace to be best reflected by the American Legion. Appreciating this, those members of Company B, 307th Infantry, who regarded with favor the idea of a post-bellum organization, applied to the American Legion for a charter. One was granted, and they were admitted as the Burt Kelly Post No. 172. The name was selected in honor of the memory of two of their comrades, Sergeant Frank W. Burke, killed by a high-explosive shell on the line of the Vasile, August 23, 1918, and Corporal John E. Kelly, killed by a high-explosive shell during the Battle of Merville, September 8, 1918. This publication of the history of Company B was made possible by the members of the Burt Kelly Post under the following officers: President William F. Howard, Vice Presidents John A. Ross, Arthur J. Hamblin, and Alfred Heller, Secretary A. James DiMaggio, Treasurer Thomas F. Twyford, Corresponding Secretary Julius KLAUSNER, Jr., Executive Committee Donald M. Wallach, Fred I. Guy Frost, and Ralph U. Brett. Watching the home fires. They were watched, and highly they burned, while those who more than all else represented to us the concrete reason for which we served. None of us but felt that we were fighting for our country, but all of us knew that we were fighting for our home folks, our mothers and our fathers, our sisters and our wives, and our sweethearts and our friends, all banded together so that we, while never losing the thought of home, were also not to lose its touch. Those tenders of the fireside, whom we knew as the family unit, were organized as the Company B family unit and were affiliated with the 307th Regiment family unit. They formed on our embarkation for overseas, and by virtue of a succession of meetings under the active and enthusiastic leadership of Miss William Vanamy and Miss Virginia Fuller, they became welded into a body that accomplished immeasurable benefit not only for our physical but for our spiritual welfare. The socks, the cigarettes, the wristlets, and the soap were needs of vast import, but our knowledge that those behind us were marshaled just as we were was more warming than wristlets, more comforting than cigarettes. The officers during the early period were Miss Virginia Fuller, President, Miss Helen Pritchard, Secretary, Miss W. B. Wise, Treasurer. The meetings were held in a barren loft at 6 East 30th Street, New York City. Here the ideas were conceived, the plans formulated, and the policies acted upon that were so far-reaching and effective. Though first drawn together for the good of Company B, their own sufferings served to consolidate their interests and to strengthen their purpose. As notice after notice issued from Washington advising us to losses in battle by death and by wounds, the need for common consolation became most urgent, and a noble response came from those who were in position to give comfort. Those were trying days, days of mental agony, days of lodging and hoping and praying. In September, one of our own men, Sergeant George A. Klein, Jr., who had been returned to the United States as an instructor, appeared at a meeting and gave word, mostly welcome, some sad, to the news-hungry relatives. These various activities were recorded in a small 4-page bulletin published for and distributed to us overseas. And then the armistice. Relief from the tension of the meeting was given by the final let-up of the war, and soon the time came when much thought was given to filling those 9x4x3 boxes of Christmas cheer. The date of our return was flashed across the waters during the early part of April, and immediately wheels were set in motion to prepare for it. Their welcome took the form of a reception and dance. For the first time, and the only time, Company B and the family unit were together. And as a token of their affection and regard, they presented to each of us a silver signet ring bearing our divisional insignia, Liberty, together with the company and regimental designation inside the ring they had placed as their wish, "May God protect you." Guests of especial honor were the 2 McIntyre sisters who were so active overseas with the Salvation Army, and who for so long a time had been identified with our division, having been for a while assigned to our own regiment. Thus culminated the activities of the family unit of Company B. But just as we have decided upon a continuation of our organization, the same in substance, if not in form, so the unit decided to serve as the auxiliary to the Burt Kelly Post, American Legion. The auxiliary meetings are held in the rooms adjoining those of the Burt Kelly Post at the 77th Division Club. The original board of officers includes Miss A.J. Hamlin, President, Miss Virginia Fuller, Miss Sarah Kelly, and Miss William Charles, Vice Presidents, Miss Anna Charles, Secretary, and Miss W.B. Wise, Treasurer, and their banner is still held aloft, a new name, but the old purpose. The end of Section 3, The History of Company B, 307th Infantry. This is the end of the History of Company B, 307th Infantry, by Julius KLAUSNER, Jr. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.